Well, indeed, that tragedy which occurred on Friday, taking the lives of senior military officers and crew, including the late Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Ibrahim Matahiru, continues to be the focus of our discussion this morning. And we're being joined by retired Air Vice Marshal Gbolahan Adekunle, who is a former Chief of Policy and Plans, Chief of Training and Operations at the headquarters, NAF, a former Residential Air Fleet Safety Officer, and also a former Fleet Operations Officer of the Presidential Air Fleet. General, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm sure that you were also very disturbed by the tragedy which saw the lives of the senior military officers and crew losing their lives in that particular incident. And maybe you have been able to, I don't know, examine, I don't know if you've questioned what could have gone wrong with this particular flight. We understand that, yes, the weather was bad. They were scheduled to land in an airstrip somewhere, and then later on changed their minds and came to land at the Kaduna airport. Sadly, that did not go down as planned, and that's what led to the tragedy. Have you been able to, think about what you think could have gone wrong causing this particular accident?
Again, thank you for having me, Makwe. I want to start by praying for the repose of the souls of all the gentlemen, officers, and airmen that we have, and soldiers that we have lost in this very horrendous incident. I'll tell you, I haven't thought about anything since that day. And the reason is that I know for a fact, right from my days in the service up to now, that the Nigerian Air Force is expending a lot of money, time, and energy on a very robust safety management program, which is designed to do nothing but prevent incidents like this from happening. Like I said, the loss of our colleagues, especially the generals and the airmen, is very, very heartbreaking, but flying carries some inherent risks. There's nothing we can do about the risks involved with flying. The records that have been made available to me indicate that first the airplane took off and was headed to Kaduna military base. This is a standard runway. Used to be Kaduna Airport in the 60s and 70s before the Kaduna International Airport was built. So this is not just one airstrip anywhere. This is Kaduna, old Kaduna runway, now inherited by the Air Force. Their destination was Kaduna Air Force Base. Unfortunately, as they approached, the information I have is to the effect that Tower informed them there was a storm moving in. Now, if you are an observer of weather, especially at this time of the year, you will see that storms usually move in the evenings, early in the morning and the evenings, and they usually flow in a northeast to southwesterly direction. So if you know the direction of the Kaduna military runway relative to the Kaduna International Airport, you will know that any storm that passes over the Kaduna Airport, Kaduna military runway, I beg your pardon, is likely to eventually, pass over the Kaduna International Airport. So, heading for Kaduna Air Force Base and having been told that they couldn't get in there, of course, as competent pilots, they will have filed the Kaduna Civil as their weather alternate, in case they won't be able to land at the Air Force Base. They headed for their planned alternate. And there was an aircraft that had taken off earlier out of Kaduna Civil, headed for Zaria. That aeroplane could also not land in Zaria. It was told to turn back, and it landed just before they were to land. They landed, but for some reason, they couldn't keep the aircraft on the ground, and then we ended up with this very unfortunate situation. Why I'm concerned about saying too much about what has happened is that first and foremost, the rules of air accident investigation demand that we save as little as possible, so that the job of the Air Accident Investigation Board which will eventually investigate this, will be seen to be unbiased, impartial, and not prejudiced. There's so much negative information flowing all over the place. People have said things that make sense. They've said the plausible. They've said the outright ridiculous. We need to bear in mind that we are dealing with the officers and men of Nigerian armed forces.
Indeed, that's why there's a lot of concern, and rightly so too, because I'm sure the people of Nigeria are concerned about losing so many people in so many tragedies in such a little time. Thankfully, the black box of this aircraft has been retrieved, and a lot of Nigerians will be looking forward to investigation. We understand that it's not usual for the Accident Investigation Bureau to investigate military matters, but they have been invited in this instance. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I suspect that the Chief of Air Staff himself, who is a qualified flight safety officer from the same institution in Pakistan where I was trained, wants to be as transparent as possible in this investigation, because it involves, first and foremost, like you said, top-level military officers, and then it has invoked a lot of passion and emotions across the land. To know the former Chief of Army Staff is to love him. Ebullient, confident, self-assured general. His confidence radiated and impacted on people around him. So no one would love to lose that kind of person. So I understand that, I get it. But the officers who were involved, the pilots, the crew, they didn't go home. I mean, they didn't go on a planned journey of no return. They didn't leave their homes that day with their, family members. The captain was newly married, or one of them was newly married, from information available to me. They didn't plan to leave their family members, permanently. So this was an accident.
Indeed. Indeed. So that's why we're asking the question. I mean, I think the frequency also is something that has called a lot of attention. The fact that this year alone, we've lost 3 military aircrafts. There are huge questions as to the frequency. I mean, if this were happening in civil aviation, by now, a lot of people will be going by road. So to assure even the people, their family members, that it wasn't that their lives were unduly risked, because there have been a lot of questions around whether monies have been provided for maintenance of aircraft, whether they were in tip-top shape, whether there have been a lot of questions. I'm sure you must have heard some of them. What is your experience in how aircraft are maintained in the military, especially now that we're in the middle of a war with Boko Haram?
Thank you very much for that question. The Beechcraft, though a multi-purpose aeroplane, is maintained in line with civil aviation regulations. Its last inspection, from details available, was done on the 19th of April. The last heavy inspection that was done on the aeroplane was duly certified, good to go, ready to fly. And it had done so many, flights before the ill-fated one, that we're discussing. Now, aircraft maintenance is not like you take your car to your mechanic and they remove one screw, they cannot remember where they kept it. Everything you do in aircraft maintenance is done by the book. When you see them going through an aircraft maintenance, you see a book this big. That book says, remove screw so, and place it so. That's all you have on one page. Do you know why? To ensure that nothing goes wrong. Unfortunately, no matter how careful you are, no matter how careful you try to be, no matter how competent the personnel involved are, once in a while things go wrong. 3 accidents in the last 6 months or thereabouts is a lot. And I get it. I'm also bothered about it. But you have to bear in mind that there was an Alpha jet involved. An Alpha jet that was flying in hostile territory. Those of us who are in the military will know that no matter how hard you pray that things don't go wrong, when you are in war, things are likely to go wrong. When you are flying in hostile territory, you are exposed to enemy fire. I do not have the report of the accident investigation that investigated the Alpha jet crash, but the fact remains that it was flying in hostile territory. Anything could have gone wrong. But the two aeroplanes that were doing what you can consider near civil assignments, one had an engine failure. Circumstances are different. The management of that engine failure up to the point that the aeroplane crashed is what I have not been briefed about. But again, the Air Accident Investigation Board, or whatever board that the Air Force sets up, will investigate it, and then the report will be made known with a view to ensuring that the likelihood of what has just happened is repeating itself. The likelihood of this thing that just happened repeating itself is minimized, if not completely eradicated. And the Air Force has, in every of its units, safety management programs that are designed to do this. Every Air Force unit has a safety officer attached to it. Every operational unit has a safety officer who has gone, apart from being a qualified pilot, who has gone to study systems and processes that will ensure that all things being equal, all human shortcomings removed, accidents are not likely to occur. But like I said before we started this conversation, the day the Wright brothers chose to fly, we started defying nature, and that is the truth. God didn't want us to fly. If he wanted us to fly, he would have given us wings. But we have chosen to fly, and many things have been in place by aircraft manufacturers, system operators and designers to ensure that the likelihood of this happening is minimized. But once in a while, these things do happen, and it's unfortunate that we had this sequence in this short order over the last 6 months or so. I am sure the Chief of Air Staff is as concerned, if not more concerned than you and I, to ensure that things like this don't happen again. In that light, I understand just yesterday, he has just set up a board to carry out a systems audit of all our operational units. It doesn't get better than that.
I mean,
it doesn't show concern.
Because indeed, I'm sure that even the airmen will be very concerned about the aircraft that they are flying. This kind of accident, could also, deal a big blow on their own confidence as well. And I'm sure that some of these things, much as it is for the benefit of Nigerians to also have confidence in the Air Force, it could also further boost the confidence of those who will operate those aircraft. Nonetheless, there have also been questions as to the level of experience of the airmen. Do you want to comment on their level of experience and their rank vis-a-vis the VIPs that they were carrying? You have carried VIPs yourself.
I am worried that we Nigerians are getting unduly emotional about this. I understand where it is coming from. It's because of our deep sense of loss. We are all grieving, we are hurting. I understand that. The captain of this aircraft had 2,450 flying hours. As a flight lieutenant, our generation was supposedly, flying in the golden days of the Nigerian Air Force. How many of us had 2,450 hours as flight lieutenants? Flight lieutenants? And in which Air Force is a flight lieutenant a small boy to fly? That is the rank bracket between flight lieutenant and squadron leader. That's when you are going to do the flying that would define your career in the Air Force. By the time you are wing commander, you are already commanding, either a squadron or a wing or something. So you are already getting involved in administration. But the flying, the critical mass of your flying that will define you, that they will say, oh, this officer can be entrusted with social assignment. You are going to do all that flying as flight lieutenant, squadron leader. I, as a flying officer, was already flying presidents of this country. 1983, I was flying President Shehu Shagari. I flew him from Kaduna to Mina in Edonia 128. Nobody questioned my rank. Our incumbent president and commander-in-chief, I was attached to him in my degree when we were doing this operation to clear away the Chadians who had invaded our territory in the northeast. up until 4 months before he became head of state, I was a flying officer. Flying officer. 3 good years before I was even considered for promotion to flight lieutenant. I was flying a man who went on to become my head of state 4 months after. I understand that we are hurting. I understand we are grieving. But let's not destroy that which holds us together. Let's not say and do things that will destroy the confidence of the Air Force in itself, the confidence of the other services in the Air Force, the confidence of the services in themselves. Because whether we like it or not, the Nigerian Air Force and the other services must continue to cooperate. The Nigerian Armed Forces must interoperate in the overall interest of our national security.
General, it's a fine place to leave it. We have to thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Early this morning. Retired Air Vice Marshal Gbolahan Adekunle is the former Chief of Policy and Plans, Chief of Training and Operations at the headquarters of the Nigerian Air Force, former Presidential Fleet Safety Officer, and a former Fleet Operations Officer of the Presidential Air Fleet.